where by the time a government is elected, they have spent so much time ruling things out that they've effectively tied themselves in a policy straitjacket where they can't really do all that much without breaking, breaking their word. And that's something, that we've seen with the productivity roundtable where Albo's ruling this out and, oh, we're not going to touch tax, we're not going to touch this, we're not going to touch that. And it's like, well, if you're not going to touch anything, how can you affect change? So I think that, we've effectively got politicians who and vested interests who just have our politicians tying themselves in knots and just basically just committing to accomplishing nothing. And while that may be fine if you're a happy vested interest, if you're just a regular Australian hoping for a better deal, well, I think you're out of luck, unfortunately.
Well, talking about tying in knots, the UK, of course, the UK government before the last election said we were not going to lift VAT, which is GST. We're not going to actually change the tax on working people, and the national insurance, which is another big cost on UK households, is also not going to change. So they basically locked out those three big levers of tax. What that means is that they're now struggling because the costs of government are actually rising, the cost of debt's rising. And so they've sort of nibbled around the edge and trying to find other small levers, and they hit businesses on the tax side last time around. And now there's a significant speculation they're going to have to break that commitment that they gave before the last election, because they're about £40 billion short of where they need to be over the end of the period. And they've got these sort of artificial rules that they've put in place to sort of control what they do. And it's like, you can't make this stuff up. As you say, you end up sort of not committing to anything and promising you're not going to do this. So it becomes a completely negative story rather than a positive story. And you end up being completely hands tied behind your back, against the wall, no chance of doing anything. And sometimes that's one of the reasons why politicians don't seem to make much difference. They sort of just don't have any ability. And then the vested interests, as you say, just pick this up and just run with it and say, well, we'll be fine then. And again, I'm seeing the same thing with the productivity discussion. The vested interests are all out there with their wonderful ideas, and it's a mess.
It's times like this I think about South Korea of all places because they've got like one of the basically in terms of like a major country that's actually bigger than a few million people. They've got the most deterioration in their birth rate on the face of the planet.
Yes.
And they're basically, within it, I mean, the projections say that within a few centuries they're basically going to cease to exist. Now, personally, I don't particularly subscribe to that because I think there'll always be those groups of people who do end up having children. So, but in terms of like a nation, yeah, they will basically, go quietly into the night for the most part. But instead of the vested interest just thinking, hey, what's the point of ruling over effectively, a country in demographic ashes and thinking maybe I should do something different. Maybe I should have some patriotism and, have some thought about my nation having a future. They just turn around and they just keep pressing the same crap. And it's the same, if they've got exactly the same problem. They don't want to see a crash in property prices. They don't want to see, a strong rise in wages and living standards for people because that would cost too much and that would make them uncompetitive. So there's just all these issues that just go unaddressed. I mean, there's even, say in Korea in particular, there's issues of, there's social problems. There's, there's the issues with a patriarchal society. There's all these different issues that are major. Yet instead of addressing them or even attempting to address them in a far more serious way, they just let it fester. And I think that's why, when people say, oh, how do you feel about, like the government or everything, moving towards addressing Australia's issues, I just look at them and I say, well, we haven't had much luck elsewhere so far.